So I'm Hayley, hello. I'm the Senior Programs Manager here at Planet Arc, and we're delighted to be joined by Tetra Pak and ThinkStep to present the life cycle assessment of beverage packaging. I'm coming to you today from Gundagara country. I'd like to acknowledge on behalf of Planet Arc as well the traditional owners of the places in which we live, work and play. We recognise the enduring relationships the elders past, present and emerging have with their lands and pay our respects. Alrighty, so who are Planet Arc? We've been around since 1992. We're a non-for-profit leading environmental behaviour change organisation, and we're proud to say one of Australia's most trusted environmental organisations. Our mission is to unite government, businesses, schools and individuals through positive environmental actions. Some key achievements of ours. You may have heard of cartridges for Planet Arc. We've recycled over 56 million cartridges. Our recycling near use website has had gets over 3.9 million page views each year. We've planted over 28 million trees since 1996 with our National Tree Day campaign, which is coming up really soon in the end of July. We've engaged over 2 million students in National Recycling Week and our sort of sub-program Schools Recycle Right since 2018. And we also have a program called the Seedling Bank in which we've organised and donated the money for plantings of 170k seedlings. Let's get on to our relationship with Tetra Pak. So Tetra Pak and Planet Arc have been working together for quite a few years now. Tetra Pak is supporting recycling at Tetra Pak is part of a broader commitment to protecting the environment. Tetra Pak's approach to sustainability is shaped by its brand promise to protect what's good. This encompasses commitment of protecting food, people and futures as well. Tetra Pak is a sponsor of Planet Arc's National Recycling Week and Recycling Near You website in part of its commitment to support the transition to a low circular economy. And National Recycling Week is what we're about. So this year will be our 30th anniversary in the second week of November. We've been talking rubbish since 1996. For those of you who might want to show their age, we've been doing it since, if you remember, recycling bins were just those small plastic tubs where you kind of have to weigh down the newspapers with the wine bottles or whatever, not that I was drinking at the age of 7. And we've been helping Australians recycle right since then. It's one of Planet Arc's flagship campaigns, and we aim to educate and empower people to make sustainable choices when it comes to waste. We connect with community groups, schools, businesses and government to provide them with the tools they need to educate their network and run their own National Recycling Week events. Recycling Near You, if you haven't checked it out, please do. It's Australia's most comprehensive waste information platform, making it easy to find recycling and reuse solutions for households and businesses. If you weren't aware, we used to have a business recycling site and Recycling Near You. We've combined those together as of late last year. The platform empowers individuals and organisations to make informed decisions when packaging and products reach their end of life by showing what, where and how items can be recycled and reused. Over 1.8 million Australians use RNY Recycling Near You every year. So today we have some great speakers. It won't just be me. I'll be here to facilitate, and I'll facilitate the Q&A at the end of the session as well. So from Tetra Pak, we have Sonalinka Sharma. She has over 13 years experience in the food and beverage packaging and processing industry, working across multiple regions with Tetra Pak. As Packaging Portfolio Director for Oceania, Sonalinka guides portfolio direction and innovation in response to evolving customer, regulatory, and sustainability expectations, while working with stakeholders across the value chain to translate sustainability ambitions into practical, regionally relevant solutions. So you'll be hearing from Sonalink after Jeff. Jeff is from ThinkStep ANZ. Jeff is an expert in assessing complex product life cycle ranging from buildings to agriculture, transport to electronics. He focuses on sustainability strategy, life cycle assessments, and the environmental product declarations. Jeff has been embedding sustainability thinking within organizations for over a decade, working across sustainability. What is wrong with me today? Working across sustainability, I say that word too many times a day, assessment, strategy, and innovation. So I will hand over to Jeff. And again, if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A function at the top.
Thank you very much, Hayley. So today I'm going to talk to you about lifecycle assessment and how we applied lifecycle assessment to compare the environmental performance of packaging in Australasia. I want to start first by going through what the method actually is, and then we'll talk about how we applied it to Tetra Pak and packaging. So lifecycle assessment, or LCA, is a way of assessing the footprint or environmental performance of a product through its full life. You're looking at it as if you're mimicking a biological life cycle. So you've got this idea of cradle to grave or cradle to cradle, where you're talking about extracting raw materials from the ground, manufacturing something, using it, and then the point where you dispose of it, and what you make, what choice you make at that point. Do you reuse it? Do you recycle it? Can you remanufacture it in some way? So we're looking at what goes in, the raw materials, the energy, and what comes out, the waste and the emissions. The idea of this is that you're trying to reduce the impact, so the smaller the number, the better the result, typically. So I wanted to start by where LCA came from, because we're going kind of full circle on packaging today, because LCA actually started with trying to assess the environmental footprint of Coke bottles back in 1969. So Coke was kind of the originator of the method in many ways. They were looking at, there was a kind of environmental awakening in the late 60s. They were looking at how they could apply this technique to look at what is the most efficient, lowest footprint bottle design that they could come up with, and this, I'm showing cans here, but bottles, cans, packaging types for bottling beverages. They developed some of that work. Then there was the energy crises in the 1970s, and then the technique really took off. It then kind of got picked up through universities, and then got standardized in the 1990s. In the Australian context, the Australian Life Cycle Assessment Society was founded in 2001 and has kind of existed since that time. And LCA in Australia kind of came through in the late 1990s. So what can LCA do? It helps in a range of different ways. So it can help you to benchmark your product to help you know your number. The footprint of my product is 7 or 5 or 20. It can then help you to make a comparison. Is that number good or bad? So I want to compare that between my product, competitor products, other products that I make. It can also help you to understand trade-offs. So when we're looking at the environmental footprint of a product, we're not just talking about its carbon footprint, we're also talking about its water footprint, or its waste footprint, or its energy footprint. We're talking about all sorts of different footprints that are relevant to that product. And you can start to understand when you make comparisons, or you look at the kind of demand of a person in a year, you can start to see, okay, is my product contributing more to one environmental indicator than another? And it helps you to understand those kinds of trade-offs. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, it's a method that's standardized by international standards and has been widely used for the last few decades by industry. So I wanted to give just a few examples here of who uses life cycle assessment, and just to show that it's growing. So on the left-hand side, I've got a range of logos from fast-moving consumer goods companies that are using the LCA method. There's thousands upon thousands of companies using LCA internationally. This is just some examples that might resonate with this audience. On the right-hand side, I'm showing something slightly different, which is environmental product declarations, which are basically a way of packaging up a life cycle assessment and putting it into a standardized document that's easier to read. It's kind of like a nutrition label, but with environmental data. And what you can see in this graph is just the growth in this type of labeling, or this type of declaration in Australasia since this particular program was founded in 2014. The light purple represents the number of organizations signed up. The dark purple represents the number of actual documents or declarations. You can see that there's a huge amount of growth. This only goes to 2024. It grew even more in 2025. I just don't have the more recent data. When you're looking at LCAs, it's worth keeping in mind that not all life cycle assessments are created equal. So there are standards for life cycle assessment. There's ISO 14040 and ISO 14044, but not everybody follows them. So what I wanted to do was put a checklist up here of things you can look for when you're looking at an LCA that's been put out by someone. Are they following the standards? So the standards are ISO 14040, ISO 14044 for life cycle assessment. There's also a standard for product carbon footprinting, which is called ISO 14067. And when you're making comparisons, you essentially have to kind of go up a tier in your life cycle assessment. The standards require you to do a lot more work. We effectively need to go through, as soon as you want to publish a comparison, as Tetra Pak have done, and we'll kind of talk through and they'll present later, you need to go through a peer review process to just check that your claims are credible and that you've followed the method appropriately. When you see a study like that, the study author has to publish the report, the reviewer statement, and the comments the reviewer made, as well as how you responded to those comments and addressed them. It's also worth kind of keeping in mind that there's practitioner certification for LCA practitioners. This isn't required by standards, but I've put up the badges from the Australian and New Zealand Life Cycle Assessment Societies on the slide. So how do you do an LCA? There's 4 stages. You start by defining what you're doing. So you set a goal, you set a scope. You then start gathering data, the inputs of raw materials, the inputs of energy, the outputs of waste, the outputs of emissions. You then calculate what the impacts are. So that's what the different footprints are, the carbon footprint, the water footprint, the waste footprint. And then finally, you interpret the results and determine, okay, well, what does this mean? You know, is this product good or bad compared to something else? And it gives you an idea. And it's worth keeping in mind that there is no product that doesn't have an impact. All products have impacts, right? And there's no kind of perfect, purely sustainable thing. We're just trying to work out, relatively speaking, what is preferable, you know, is choice A preferable to choice B. So I'm going to focus really on the goal and scope section for the Tetra Pak life cycle assessment study, and then I'm going to hand over to Sanalika, who's going to talk more about the results of that study. So what were we trying to do for Tetra Pak? We were trying to do 2 main things. The first was to quantify the environmental performance of different beverage packaging options in Australasia. And to do that, we went out and we actually bought packs from supermarkets. So we bought 86 packs from retailers in Australasia. We emptied them, we cleaned them, we weighed them, we pulled them all apart, and we tried to work out what would be the supply chain for each of those things. For the beverage cartons, we took 26 cartons made by Tetra Pak and the specifications that they supplied, and we checked them against real measured masses for things that we purchased. We then did a lot of analysis across that, calculations, and then we prepared a long technical report and a short summary of that report that's a bit easy to digest, and took that through a review by a panel of experts. So we took the data that was on the market representing a recent year, and then we gathered that information. We actually quantified it. We came up with footprint numbers for lots of different pack types, Tetra Pak and other packs, and we compared that all to come up with carbon footprint numbers, as well as a whole bunch of other footprint types. The focus of the study was quite broad. We considered 4 different so 4 different product categories, I should say, so juice and milk and other categories. And we looked at 7 different types of packaging. So beverage cartons, but we also looked at plastic bottles, specifically PET, recycled PET and HDPE. We looked at glass bottles, we looked at pouches and aluminium cans. We also looked at a wide range of packaging sizes from 250 milliliters right up to 2-liter bulk packs. And we considered all different layers of packaging. So when you're buying packaging on the shelf, you're looking at the primary pack, but you've also got secondary packaging like cardboard cartons, you've got tertiary packaging like pallets and shippers, there might be pallet wraps. We were considering the entire packaging system. And we were looking importantly across the whole life cycle. So when you do life cycle assessment, you can focus in on just a part and do what's often called cradle to gate. We were looking at cradle to grave or cradle to cradle, the full system. This particular study was ISO compliant, and it was peer reviewed by a panel of 3 experts. So when you're looking at assessing the environmental performance of a product, you have to look at which stages are in scope and how you're assessing them. So for this particular study, we looked at everything from getting the raw materials out of the ground or from secondary sources where you're recycling them. We looked at manufacturing them into any intermediate things that are happening. So for PET, you might make a preform that you then transport, and then you blow mold to make a bottle that you then fill, for example. So we're considering those different stages. We're considering transport to the place of filling and, and closing the pack. If there's any sterilization that's needed, we consider that. If it's a retorted pack, we consider the heating. And then we consider all of the packaging, so the different packaging layers, distribution to the customer, and then finally what happens at end of life. And at end of life, we've based that largely on market averages for Australia. So for each different pack format, what are the average performance? And that's typically based on data from the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation. So once you get through all those stages, you get a big long report. The big long report is a little bit hard for most people to digest. So we package it up in a short report, which we call a nutshell summary, just to give you all the findings in a nutshell. So if you want the full detail, you can go and read it. But the full, the short report is available on Tetra Pak's website, and you're welcome to go and have a look after this, and we'll share a link following the webinar so you can have a look if you wish to. So I'd now like to hand over to Sanalinka to present the results. You're muted.
Thanks, Jeff, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar today. So Jeff has spoken to us and taken us through what a life cycle is, what the process is, and what the scope was for the study. What I'll talk through is about how do we make more informed and transparent decisions, and share some high-level findings that we had in our study. And we have got a very diverse audience today, which is fantastic, because now the life cycle assessment and the impact really depends on the whole system and not just a part of it. So what I'll talk about, the plan is pretty simple for the next 15 minutes. I'll take you through a quick introduction of Tetra Pak. Then I'll share some high-level findings of our 2026 life cycle analysis, and then also touch base upon why a life cycle matters. Starting off with an introduction of who we are. So Tetra Pak is centered around food, and food is the foundation for our society, for our growth and social prosperity. It's not just nourishment, it's really connection, also an opportunity. But food just won't happen by itself, right? It needs to be planted, we need to produce it, process it, then pack it right, and keep it safe. That's super important. And that's really the core of our purpose. And that's where our company exists. Our purpose is to make food safe and available everywhere and protect what's good, and not just food, but also people and planet. And that's why we provide advanced food protection systems, and in collaboration with our customers, our suppliers, and with our global employees, 24,000 in total, we protect food sustainably every day for millions of people in across 160 countries. When we talk about food protection system, what we offer is really everything from recipe testing, processing, manufacturing the food, then filling it, packing it, and off to distribution to various centers. And why is that important when we talk about life cycle analysis? Because I said life cycle analysis, and I've also shared, looks at the full system, and it's quite in sync with what we also offer, which is also a full system of food processing and packaging. We have three businesses of processing, packaging, and services. And for us, sustainability isn't just a side topic. It is really embedded across all of these three capabilities that allows us to influence environmental impact across the food value chain. When we talk about the equipment under processing used for food and beverage manufacturing, our approach is to minimize the resources that our equipment use and make them most resource efficient as possible. And then lead in with our services portfolio, trying to find out new ways to optimize energy use, water use, cleaning chemicals, so on and so forth across the whole plant. The basic idea is that we deliver maximum quality and try and minimize the strain that we put on the environment. And as for packaging, our ambition is to deliver what's most sustainable food package, and where we are trying to increase the renewable content in our packaging, and trying to ensure that the materials that we use are sourced responsibly and sustainably. And in doing all of this, now while we are a global company, we have a strong local presence. We understand the global context, but also where we are based in. When we are based in Australia and New Zealand, the local conditions. The second point is super important. The LCA results are influenced hugely by global supply chain. It's a very connected world. What happens in one part impacts everyone. But at the same time, for an LCA, local conditions are also super important. What are the local production setups? How are the products being manufactured here? What are the energy rates, consumption rates, and how are we treating, recycling and our end of life treatment? So all of this also influences life cycle analysis. And that is why a region-specific study like this that we have done for Australia and New Zealand really matters. Having said that, what I will now move on is to really share with you some key findings of our life cycles study, some headline findings, and then try and unpack a bit more on what they mean when you're trying to make decisions. So I'll take you through 3 key findings today. So when we map the full life cycle, Jeff in his section showed us the full cradle to grave, what's been covered in this life cycle analysis. So when we map the full life cycle analysis and try and quantify the impact at each stage, we saw a very strong pattern that emerged, and which led us to our first big insight, that on average, the study showed us that 98% of the climate impact was happening by the time the packaging was hitting the shelf. And end of life, though important from other perspectives, from a carbon impact perspective, was only contributing about 2%. And when we say end of life, it included recycling and landfill and incineration. So in simple terms, the biggest driver that we saw were the raw material extraction, processing, and the energy going in manufacturing and in converting products and packaging. Distribution also played a role, at a smaller scale. I'll show you some numbers in the slides coming where you can see the impact of distribution, where we do take into account what is the weight of the packaging, how are these being moved around and transported. And end of life, which is critical for a circularity purpose, from a customer expectation point of view or regulatory compliance, it has a smaller share of climate impact, just on an average at about 2%. So what I'll do after this is I'll share with you some examples of packaging types and how these numbers have stacked up.
Sorry to interrupt, Sonalika. A couple of people are having a little bit of trouble hearing you. I don't know whether you move closer to the microphone.
Is it for everyone or
just a couple of comments?
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, so
thank you.
Right. So I'll start off with one of the package type. Here it is, it's Tetra X. It is basically a gable top chilled carton pack that you usually find on our retail shelves for milks and flavored milks. So Jeff shared this overall journey with us in the earlier slides, right? If we look at Tetra X or a gable top chilled packaging carton, the overall carbon impact of this package was about 72.1 grams, right, per pack. But the key point to note is the impact at each of the stage. The biggest impact, close to, a little less than half of it comes just when we are trying to produce from the raw material used in production of the packaging type. This is where, the hotspot, the biggest hotspot is. And then if you track, followed by that, you can see some impacts coming from manufacturing, filling, distribution as well. And in this particular example, the consumer end of life was contributing to only 1%. So if we now look at another type of packaging format, similar numbers. Now here is the example of NHTP milk bottle for it. The overall number, though it's as was also shared here, it was about 216 grams. The key point is not just this total, right? If you again look at the contribution of each of the stage along the life cycle journey, again, the biggest contribution is coming upstream rather than downstream. So we need to, so life cycle analysis really points out these hotspots for us, and it shows where the impact is concentrated. And it helps us to make decisions not just on assumption or one particular single attribute, but taking into account the total picture, really guiding our decisions, making them fact-based. If I quickly, in summary, put these numbers together side by side, right, it really clarifies the message that I've been trying to deliver. And this is where the design choices that we make, the material selection, and production energy start influencing and having impact on the climate outcomes. So whenever we are looking to reduce our climate impact, let us look at the full picture. And with that said, I'll move on to the next slide, the next key finding that we had from our study. And that was that cotton has the lowest carbon footprint in Australia. And you will notice that there are some numbers for New Zealand as well. So within New Zealand as well, it was one of the lowest. And there are some differences between the two markets, but that is really coming from the local context, local differences between Australia and New Zealand. But if you compare with glass, we looked at comparing with HDPE, RPF. That was the part of the scope of the total study that we did. Cotton still came out with the lowest carbon footprint, carbon impact. This was in the chilled products with shorter shelf life or ESL. But when we looked at the ambient side or the long life, long shelf life products, we saw very, very similar results. The actual quantum differed, but in terms of the key messaging, it again was very consistent as to what we saw in the chilled packaging, that cotton had the lowest carbon footprint in Australia and also one of the lowest in New Zealand when we assessed the formats or packaging types that were being sold on shelf in these two markets. Moving on, after sharing these couple of key findings, what I want to quickly talk to you about is why this information is important and why does life cycle analysis or LCA matters so much right now. Sustainability, some years back was good to have, but now it is no longer optional, right? It is sort of licensed to operate and is getting increasingly important. We see that consumers are demanding sustainability. There are ample reports or studies that have been done around here by different agencies. We know the retailers in our markets, be it Woolworths, the Coles, Aldi, everyone is more and more focused on sustainability, looking at emissions, and also from a regulatory perspective and investors. So this is all creating a need for a credible, evidence-based decision tool. And that is where life cycle analysis comes in and supports with that. If I were to share, why or some key reasons of why LCA matters. Firstly, it guides us making smarter packaging choices. LCA can help us scientifically compare different options and identify a lower impact pathway based on credible data. And when we have this credible data with us, we can back our sustainability claims with confidence, with proof, and that helps create transparent communication and tell people the actual difference. And then thirdly, it can support the decarbonization goals for brand owners, especially when you are making packaging choices or driving innovation. Even that can contribute to reducing emission and then meeting your target. And one of the most important points is life cycle analysis gives us the full environmental picture. Recycling matters, but LCA helps us to see, which are the big levers we can pull. Where are the hotspots for us, which often are upstream, which are coming from the raw material that has been used in converting that raw material into different packaging types and to some extent distribution. So in summary, there's this shift that we are seeing in consumer behavior from retailer, government, from the whole ecosystem. And because of that, we really need to focus on knowing our numbers, knowing where the impact is coming from to take up some meaningful conversations. And life cycle assessment is becoming super essential. It's data-driven, evidence-based, and this is what will help us move the discussions from not just opinions, but to actual decisions and impactful decisions. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Haley.
Thank you, Sonalika and Jeff. I will change the slide and go through some questions. So I'll go through what's written in the Q&A, and if we have any time, I'll then open it up to raised hands. Alrighty. I think this, most of them are directed towards probably Jeff, your best place to answer, but also Sonalika if you have comments to add. First up, are there any LCAs that include packaging types that are reusable? Glass/PET would likely perform better in a reuse comparison.
Yep, there've definitely been LCAs of reusable packaging done, also compared to single-use packaging in other markets. So there've been some done in Europe, for example. Typically what they find is that everything depends on reverse logistics and number of reuse cycles. So if you can reuse something a lot of times and the reverse logistics are not too far or using too much energy or there isn't too much cleaning, then the reusables can stack up well. I think where they can fall over is if you've got to get them back a long distance, or they don't last many times before they break, or if you have to do a lot of high temperature cleaning. So often when you're doing a reusable, you might have to do a 70-degree, 80-degree, 90-degree hot wash to get the thing ready to be redistributing to the customer. If it's going to be going back into a mass distribution system, there's a significant environmental penalty associated with that. So they can stack up well, but it depends on how you do it, right? You've got to do it well.
Awesome. Can you share why the distribution carbon footprint of HDPE bottle is higher than a gable top carton?
It's heavier. And there's some differences there, but there's also some differences in weight, and we make some slight differences in assumptions around distribution patterns for cartons versus HDPE.
Nice. All right. Are there any assumptions or hypotheses made before carrying out the LCA?
I mean, there will be. I mean, effectively, we're just trying to represent what's on the market as fairly as possible. So, you know, to the earlier question, it really is a comparison of single-use packs. So we didn't include reusables. We were just saying, okay, well, if you walk into a supermarket and you're looking at a whole bunch of different beverage or food packaging options, you've got a range available to you. We tried to capture all the different packaging formats. So if there was a 1 litre milk was available in HDPE or glass or whatever, we tried to capture those packs, but it was really trying to represent what was available on the market. And Sonalika, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, Jeff, I think you've summarized that pretty clearly. As you said, we tried to reflect what we have in Australia and New Zealand, and even looking at the products that were on shelves.
Are the glass and PET products used in this comparison made from raw or recycled materials?
We try to account for average recycled content on the market. So the PET is virgin PET, the rPET is 100% recycled PET, and the glass is typical for Australia as of the year, like last year. So it has high recycled content.
Lovely. Alrighty. I'm not sure what context this in. It says by carton, I presume you mean Tetra Pak. Can you explain why it is so much lower?
So there's a few reasons for that. One reason is that Tetra Pak cartons are beverage cartons. So this confusing because there's multiple types of carton in the study. We've got beverage cartons, and then we've also got corrugated cartons for secondary packaging. But yeah, sorry, I'm talking about the primary pack, the beverage carton. The reason why it's so much lower carbon, there's several. It's really lightweight. So that's one thing. The other thing is that you've got a renewable material making up the bulk of it. So the carton's mostly paper. So there's that. The other reason is Tetra Pak's supply chain. So Tetra Pak source globally. They've got a really good supply chain. I'm in the lucky position where I get to see the environmental footprint of lots of materials across lots of different companies, and just going to say that Tetra Pak are doing really well in terms of their sourcing. They're getting really low carbon materials coming in. There's also quite a few innovations that they're bringing in terms of bio-based materials and other things to try to help bring the carbon footprint down even lower. But I'd say it's a combination of being predominantly bio-based plus really lightweight that really helps the Tetra Pak products.
I'll just add a little bit of what Jeff has said onto this here. So if you recall the slides that I shared about, the biggest impact comes really from your raw material selection. And that is where, beverage cartons being primarily on average, we are 70% paper-based. So that really helps. And in the study, we also had, we picked up cartons that are sold as they are sold on shelves in our local market. So we also have cartons that have even higher renewable content bio-based options. So in our cartons today, while we have, when we have openings or caps, for example, so those caps could be derived from today a fossil-based plastic, which will have a much higher impact. But with us at Tetra Pak, we also have an option of, using bio-based plastic, which is basically derived from non-food grade sugarcane. So we take that, convert it into ethanol, and then use that to make the plastic for going into caps. So functionality, everything remains same, but in terms of carbon impact, because we are going towards a renewable material, which we can keep on replenishing and something that takes in carbon rather than giving out carbon, that also helps.
Beautiful. Oh, accidentally zoomed in on my screen. Another question, probably more for you, Sonalika. Do you know what Tetra Pak is doing to improve end markets for recycled Tetra Paks? Does Tetra Pak buy back materials made from recycled Tetra Paks to help support these end markets?
Yes. So in terms of what we are doing to help recycle the cartons better, there are quite a few questions in this question. So let me just read and try and answer them one by one, because I can't see that question up in my screen.
It's from Claire Matthews.
Yeah, yes. Okay, so what we are doing to improve end market for recycled cartons. So basically, we are actually, this is a very good question. We have got Planet Argos on the call. So what we are doing is we are partnering with Planet Arc and other industry stakeholders in developing a producer responsibility organization or a PRO for beverage carton. And what is a PRO basically? It is, in this concept, it's sort of an industry-led entity that takes on financial responsibility and also practical responsibility for collecting, for recycling, and then disposal of products and manufacturers, right? So this is an approach that we already established in New Zealand. It's running now already under the Packaging Forum, and it's really bringing, the stability that we need to improve the infrastructure, to fill the gaps in, to have more consistent recycling outcomes. And if we talk about in terms of the setup, so in Australia, we are starting with that also. And as I said, it's already being led by Planet Arc. If you talk about, again, the second question is what we are doing to improve end markets. So end markets, there are a lot of different uses that our cartons could go in, right? They're depending on the infrastructure available. We could go into a full system recycling. So we have a local carton recycler in Australia, Safeport, based in New South Wales, that do take in factory waste. They've been operational since 2022. So they do take in end consumer waste, the waste that gets collected under the CDS schemes, and really convert them to boards that could go into, building, construction, in that segment. And also globally, Tetra Pak does invest and look into what different products could these cartons end up in. Now, the third question is, do we buy back material? So we don't directly, do we buy back from recycled Tetra Paks, right? So we don't directly buy back material from recycled Tetra Paks because, again, we need to see the recycled material that we bring back needs to give the most benefit or the most economic benefit and not the carbon impact. When we are packaging our food safety is super important, right? Because we deal in food and beverages. So we need to make sure that the recycled material that is coming is we don't currently have today legislation systems defined in place that allow for recycled material to go into food and beverage directly. This is an area that, globally is under investigation and in discussion, but in the absence of, ways and the legislation to guide it back into the food system. It is not being done, but we are working on finding different other uses and high value, self-sustaining systems where our cartons could go back in.
Awesome. Thank you, Sonalika. This might be one of the last questions just because we're running out of time. Are you seeing that the new-ish ASRS reporting standards are driving demand for lower environmental footprint packaging solutions?
Do you want to take that one, Sonalika?
Yes, Jeff, if you could take that one. Or I'll build on to you after that. So.
I probably can't comment that much on it because I'm not really in the space, but I wondered whether you might be able to.
Yeah. So in terms of what I would say is driving the demand, I'll not from this perspective, but what we see in Tetra Pak is what's happening globally is there is a lot more discussions coming in on sustainability. How is the impact of packaging? You pick up any, our retailer reports or go to Woolworths or Coles websites, for example, here, and you'll be able to see that there's increased focus on, carbon emissions. In Australia, we also have that federal requirement to start declaring the emissions in a staged manner for different companies. So because of all of this, there's increased awareness of the actual carbon impact that's happening, and more companies and organizations hence are looking at, okay, so what is really the impact and how do we reduce it? And all of these changes are driving that. In terms of, the particular comment that you asked about, like Jeff, because I'm not aware of it, I'll also have to deep dive. But from a Tetra Pak perspective, these are the reasons that we see that are driving increased number of life cycle analysis.
And maybe just building on it, I think one of the things with all kind of climate related disclosures and sustainability reporting is that it has to get through to the point where it starts to apply to your kind of scope 3 emissions. So a lot of the standards at the moment either focuses on scope 1 and 2. So scope 3 is kind of coming. As scope 3 increasingly becomes more and more common and there's more and more companies reporting on it, then they start to see, well, where is the footprint coming from? And that's where the demand will start to shift, right? So I think we're probably still a year or two away from the demand being flowing through from those kinds of standards, but they're a great starting point, right? They're helping raise awareness, they're helping companies to understand where their emissions are.
Great, thank you. I just realized we're not running out of time. We finished the actual presentation earlier than expected, so I'll just throw you a couple more questions. All right, and just so everyone knows, if we don't get to all of the questions, we will answer them all via email. This might be more for Sonalika as well. How do consumers feel about the carton format for beverages? Most beverages come in PET. I assume this is because consumers prefer the drinking experience.
The carton, the carton preference varies from product category to product category, right?
Yeah.
So depending on which product category you're talking about, that definitely you will see one pack format type being preferred more over the others. Definitely, we definitely see a strong presence of PET when you talk about products where customers would like to see the package and the product and being transparent. But on the other side, when you talk about products like milk and you want to have a good shelf life, extended distribution, that's where cartons become important. In terms of the drinking experience, we also have on-the-go caps and options in our portfolio solutions that give really good drinking experience that you can carry on with you, open, close, and drink from. But the preference definitely varies from category to category. There are some categories that are very, very strongly dominated by cartons. If you look at, dairy alternatives, plant-based, you will see a strong presence. If you go to a nearby cafe, the cartons are very prominently displayed near the coffee machine showing what is being produced. However, if you were to take a look at a different category, right, take home juice bottles, you will see more plastic bottles there for their see-through. So each format has a different role to play and different value proposition that they offer. And I think where it matches with the category, you'll see that the preference from that. So it really varies from category to category.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, one last question and then we will wrap up. This is an interesting one. Even though disposal has the least environmental impact, how does this get weighed up against the community perception or expectation? Alternative milks are common these days, but not wanted by many by the MRFs. So from a consumer perspective, this isn't great.
I mean, I think the life cycle assessment gives you an set of environmental data, and it helps with part of the decision making. It's obviously not the only thing to consider, so where there are social considerations, where there are, take back or local council or consumer preference decisions, then those are just part of the decision making process, right? So it's a way of helping make a decision, but it needs to be part of that kind of multi-criteria decision making. It's not just, it's one factor among many.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Jeff and Sonalika. It's been really informative. Even though I read it, I really enjoy listening to people's different takes and questions on the life cycle assessment and Tetra Pak's work. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. As I said, we'll send out the recording as well as questions that we couldn't get to and questions that we could get to and all of the answers as a follow-up. And thank you from us here at Planet Ark. I hope you have a really great day and we'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.